Oh my God, Rich, we have such an exciting thing to talk about today.
This is my shot of espresso. Talking to these wonderful people is going to be my shot of espresso.
Because you need it. And we have not had a lot of sleep.
No, not nearly enough.
We are coming to you today for our ICAST guidance episode from PrinceCon 48 at Princeton University in Princeton, New Jersey. And this is a 45-hour-long Dungeons & Dragons game with multiple dungeon masters and scores of players in the most incredible way possible.
Yep. And they're all collaborating for one story in one created homebrew world for this specific PrinceCon.
And the complexity of this is phenomenal. The way in which you take your character, you go on a run with one DM in one scenario. And when you finish that run, you come downstairs, you put notes up on the wall about that one scenario, and on and on and on is just, it's really fun.
Yeah, because originally I thought that like every DM brought their own one shot, and then it just got rewritten a bunch of times as they ran it over the weekend. But no, it's a continuous story where the next time a group plays with the DM that you played with, they're going to continue from where you guys left off and use the notes that you brought downstairs, which is really awesome. It makes it feel like it matters.
It really does. And you know, we're here, it's Sunday, so it's the third day of this convention. It wraps up today. So we're going to be actually leaving this podcast later when we're done talking to all these wonderful people we have on deck. And we're going to go upstairs and we're going to join the final run, which is going to be awesome. So we're hoping that you'll enjoy us bringing this thing to you if you've never heard of it before. If you're curious at any point during this podcast about anything that you might be able to find out there, go over to YouTube, look up Wither and Bloom Studios, and I will put links to all of the pertinent information into the description so that you can find it. And we're looking forward to talking to some really cool people today. Hey everybody, welcome to ICAST Guidance, your weekly Dungeons & Dragons and TTRPG podcast, where every week Rich, Garret, and I pick up a subject around the culture of gaming and discuss it with you. So without further ado, sharpen up those daggers. We're going to get started right now. I'm ready with our first guest here, and I'm excited because we got Hugh Huntsinger here, who's been here for a long time. Hugh, how you doing?
All right. I got coffee this morning.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're one of the lucky ones.
Yeah, rub it in.
Comes with experience.
So Hugh, tell us a little bit about your history with this. Tell us, first of all, let's start off by just talking about what PrinceCon is.
Yeah, what PrinceCon is back in 1976, the Student Gaming Union that was actually part of the Whig Clio Debating Society at Princeton wanted to do an annual fundraiser for themselves to have enough money to buy games for themselves. And essentially what happened was D&D had just come out the year before, and so they used a D&D tournament play that started spring break in order to do that. And essentially what they started with and are still experimenting with is the idea of compressing an entire campaign into one weekend, with the difference of instead of having one GM with his own campaign and a different GM with their campaign, throw all the GMs into one common world space and run it forward from that.
And this is the thing that I was so excited to try and wrap my head around, because you know how I'm always into this idea of narrative and storytelling and how those things develop. And in this case, it's very different here. I mean, Rich, you kind of have been getting into this a little bit. We've been talking about how the different runs, as they're called, sort of combine.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. Coming into this, I had no idea how it worked, right? But when I got here, I figured out that every DM has their own kind of mini campaign, right? And they have different chapters, usually like 4 or 5 set for the weekend. And one party can do the first chapter on their first run. And then after that, they go through it and they leave a little after action report for the next group that comes and continues this DM specific story. So they set it up in such a way to where you can jump into one campaign and jump into another DM's campaign in the same world and have it canonically make sense and have the knowledge of the past group's actions to aid you on this next chapter.
And Hugh, it wasn't always like this, right?
No, it's funny because from what I understand from the very, very first PrinceCon, all the characters were pre-generated. And when you went to a GM handed out literal blue books that had
the old exam
the
books.
old exam books that had the description in it. So, okay, you're the wizard, you're the fighter, whatever else. By the time I came along in PrinceCon 4, there was this technology called mainframes. So we actually would check in at the desk, and they had mailing labels off of the old 8.5 by 11 printed board prints, and they would put that label on an big index card, and that became your character sheet. Eventually, what's also happened a lot is that the idea of a meta theme in the world has also evolved, and essentially that was learned through trial and error. The early runs were very traditional D&D with good and evil, fighters, barbarians, thieves, and all that stuff. And they learned their lesson the hard way in terms of having literal battles of party members between the party, ignoring the GM's scenario.
Oof.
So eventually what happened was they eliminated alignment. They replaced thieves with scouts. They developed their own pantheon of PrinceCon gods, and at one point literally had unique clerical lists specific to each religion. And what's also come about with that is the idea of the meta theme. And from a convention perspective and what you're referring to with tying things together, the idea is essentially give everybody who's here a common objective goal to strive for, as opposed to fighting amongst themselves.
Yeah. And so, one of the things I love about this is, and I forgot to mention this earlier, but we are at PrinceCon 48, which means this is the 48th year that this has been going on. And what you're essentially saying is that this has been a trial and error 48-year-long experiment with how to improve upon this unique system.
Yeah, and a lot of it is that there have been some years that the idea has flopped, or you get halfway through the con and a bunch of players takes off in a different direction, and you realize like, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. And then there's perhaps a scramble to see whether or not you can patch things up on the fly. But it is really nice in that the students are, because it's not commercial, they're very willing to experiment year to year and take that risk of, what the heck, let's try this, see if it works, as opposed to how in corporate America, everything is always so safe, which is why we have, Iron Man 17 movies.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect example.
Yeah.
So, and I'm curious about this because I think when something does flop, when something doesn't turn out the way it does, it's hard, I think, for some people to get into the mindset of, well, let's shift gears here and understand this as a productive failure. Is there despair in the failure?
I wouldn't say despair, but I would say at times panic. But a lot of it, I think, is the quality of the players shine through with a lot of this stuff. And I think part of it is also that we do have today at least, a good mix of age of veteran players who come in. A lot of times we may know, from I don't want to say a cheating, but a meta standpoint of there's a storyline we need to support. For example, just a couple years ago, part of the theme was essentially you had to do something to save the world, and the wizard who casts the spell once per millennia died suddenly, so his apprentice was stuck, taken over. And the storyline was the apprentice panicked and was trying to concurrently still do the job while also trying to resign from the job. So it was a very confusing situation of this NPC character popping in and out of everybody's run and trying to help, but also running away and so forth. And ultimately what happened was they put them on trial. And we had a trial on Sunday, I believe it was, where essentially all the players in the room, this was, everybody was back together, were the jury and popular vote as to what was going on.
Oh my God, that's fantastic.
We had no control over it.
Wow.
I mean, that was the real high wire act of it.
So this is fantastic because, one of the things we did not say in this was that, okay, so everybody gets here, they get their character sheets, they go off to their respective rooms. And then by Sunday, everybody's coming back into the main room for the final conclusion of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, what a phenomenal way to use the con itself, right? To do something that you can't do on your own campaign. to have something collective happen in large numbers to conclude this campaign that was, a conglomeration of a bunch of DMs and a bunch of players.
And this might be hard for the listeners to wrap their head around how this exactly works, but I think in a little while we'll get into a more granular, broken down example of exactly how that works. But Hugh, you were telling me some really interesting stories of some of the things you've gleaned from over all the years. You got a good one for us?
Yeah, I do. One of the friends that actually, their older brother was the Princeton student that we were the young Klingons that came along, introduced. He was one of the first in our group to get married. And he and his wife had been at the con for a few years and whatnot. And the one year she came here pregnant, of course. Next year, she couldn't come because she had a toddler. But about, I want to say 2 years after that, they show up with their, I'll say 3-year-old in tow because free babysitting, why not? And we were going through the world building and whatnot. And part of the conclusion of that year essentially was that whoever the emperor, leader of the world was, had been usurped somehow, which I don't even remember anymore. But it was up to the players to decide who to elect as the new pope or king or whatnot. And of course, we had some NPCs that were proposed and had been factions all weekend. So we were figuring that the players would elect one of these three kind of idea. And what happened was when it came time for nominations on Sunday at the end of the con, of course, the GM who had NPC number 1 is like, I nominate NPC number 1. NPC number 2, NPC number 3, and of course, from Robert's Rules of Order, any other nominations? One of the players said, we nominate Nayla, this 3-year-old, as the Princess Queen. And what happened from that was everybody realized this was a great way to throw the GM's plans out the window, so they ran with it, and Nayla, the 3-year-old, was elected as the queen.
That's phenomenal. Another example of where you had no control over the outcome of the game. It basically was put into the hands of the players.
And a follow-up to that is that 25, 30 years later, Nayla is back as a GM. And also, a couple years ago, she became part of the plot. We had Queen Nayla's pirates and save the world for our queen. And while the young students and whoever had no idea who this was, the old-timers is like, hey, we pulled some legendary lore from PrinceCon's past into the current theme of what we're doing.
And the other thing I found out that's really interesting is we were in our first run with Nayla's 2 kids, which just keeps carrying on. So I love
just
that.
Spreading throughout the con.
All right, we got some great guests lined up. Hugh, this was awesome. I really appreciate you sharing your long history with us. And we're going to get some other people in here, but we look forward to getting to the end of the day with you today.
Sounds good. Thanks much.
All right. Good talking to you.
Yeah.
All right. So that was great with you. That was fantastic.
That was awesome. A lot of insight.
So we got a second guest here, and this one is really special. But we're here with Greg Arjamanian, and he is a much longer term member. Maybe not much longer.
Not that much longer, but yeah.
How you doing, Greg?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
It's really nice to talk to you. So tell us a little bit about your history with PrinceCon.
Well, I was here for the first one. I wasn't part of the organizing, but I was in there with the first group of students that put this thing together. It was in 1976.
Wow.
I guess the history of that was in 1975 when I arrived at campus. There were a group of players from New York who kind of took over a group that had started at the Whig Cliosophic Society, the Princeton Debating Society. They had a member there who was into a game called Diplomacy, and he's part of a debating society.
Perfect.
It made sense. And some of the people who were into that were also into this new thing that came out, I guess, in 1974, Dungeons and Dragons. And other of us showed up and said, oh, this is an amazing game. So, there were a whole bunch of games masters setting up campaigns. There was a Stephen T. Hoare. He was 2 classes ahead of me. Howard Mahler, who was a grad student in math department at the time. David Parker, and I'm Mark Cribbs. So and I'm missing people, but yeah, it's a very active group. And they decided, just before spring break, we should have a convention, and they put the thing on.
And 48 years later, here you are.
Yeah.
Did you say that was your first foray into D&D?
Absolutely. Well, the not the convention, but the people who were playing back in the fall of '75.
Gotcha.
And it couldn't have been much earlier, because I don't think it got invented much earlier.
I think 74 was the first year.
They in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, right?
Right. Which I'm interested in going out there actually and paying my homage to what's going on there. So what has been, in your mind, from then until now, what has been the primary driver or developer of this whole con? Like, what has really stood out to you as being the big change when you look back on all this time that has passed?
Well, the continuity. There have been people who have been playing for many years. You've talked to. There was a Bob West, who was also part of the original group. And he kept it going a lot. Actually, I think the one year the Games Masters were planning on ending the con, and he made sure that it stayed going. Unfortunately, he left us a few years ago, but he was a big force to keeping the thing going. So I guess you'll be talking to some of the other people.
Well, yeah. And I think this is actually really good news for our listeners, because it's sort of like, it's so hard just to keep your home game going. Everybody's always got scheduling conflicts. And here is a system that's been in play for 48 years. One of the things that I really enjoyed Hugh talking about in this was how failure and experiments that have been around themes have sort of either fallen apart or really succeeded, and how that's sort of taught you different ways in which to adjust your mechanics. What's something that stands out for you there? Like, what are some of the big ones? You talked about a super dungeon that you guys did early on.
Well, that was it. So actually the original PrinceCon, one of the things they had was the super dungeon. They basically had a very large dungeon, and the dungeon masters were all running, but it was all in the same dungeon. And of course the players managed to run into each other. And of course, they started fighting.
Right,
because,
of course.
That was one of the things you found out early on, was that the best opponent is other people like you. So we always it's a lot of fighting against a lot of the scenarios had fighting against other parties of adventurers. But in this one, they had different groups. And Bob West, a young Bob West, was running up and down stairways, carrying orders between the dungeon masters, saying that this is what the other party is doing.
Oh, wow. So was that kind of an early communication between all the different parties?
Yeah. Just one person running up and down the stairs.
Oh, my God.
Crazy.
He was much younger in those days. So,
yeah. I've had to play a couple of runs on the third floor, and I'm like, no, I wouldn't have it in me for that. All right. So Greg, I know you've been here for a long time, and I've only been here for 2 days, and I've already seen some really amazing stories that I've taken home with me and already started to tell. You have to have a bag full of them. Like, can you think of one that stands out?
Well, there was one with Bob West, one of the last runs before he passed, and he had. I had been running all weekend and hadn't acquired a magic weapon. And in the past, there were classes of monsters that you couldn't do anything about unless you had something that was some magic. And I managed to acquire a trident, a magic trident, and it just didn't fit with the character at all. You walk medieval knight walking around with a trident, but it was magic, and so I had kept it around. And it had the ability to control fish. And exactly, I don't want to use this thing, but I might come against something acquiring. I need something magic, so I'm carrying the thing around. And in Bob's scenario, we were between dimensions in a narrow pathway with void on all sides of us, and up from the void come these kraken tentacles. And we get attacked by flying piranha, which would have been a real disaster, except I had a trident that controlled fish, and I showed Bob the card, and he went with it. He said, "Yeah, I guess that's what it does." And so he could use the piranha to attack the kraken.
Huh.
And
That's incredible.
Well, that's the other thing is, and we're going to get into this in a little while about how these cards of magic items that get handed out to players and then logged and registered in the computer system, and how I'm getting things I wouldn't expect to know to use. And then all of a sudden they become useful.
Mm-hmm.
So there's got to be some plan there, but yours sounds more fortuitous than anything and unexpected.
Yeah. There's one other, if I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
That I thought was, it also just shows you how Dungeons and Dragons is, different from any computer game. Is that I was in a scenario where it was kind of a Guns of Navarone system situation where there was a castle on top of these. There was this massive ballista that we had to put out of commission, and we were up against an adamantine skeleton, and they're really hard to take out. Well, we had a thief. And he had a grappling hook. And
I think I know where this is going.
Yes. He tied one end of the hook to the ballista bolt, and the other end, grappling, took a swing at it. And the dungeon master said, "Yeah, a skeleton has all sorts of places to good for the hook." He goes in, throws the hook, catches it, fires the ballista, and that was the end of the
combat over.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Takes that bag of hit points and just hurls it over the wall.
Yeah, exactly.
That's fantastic.
Get out of here.
Well, Greg, this has been awesome. It's so good to talk to you. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the day today when we get to see how all of this works out. But thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
It's been nice to have some kind of like veterans, some old timers that have been around for a while that know a lot about PrinceCon compared to us, who it's our first year.
Well, listen, I think the big thing about this is the legacy of this event. I mean, nothing has carried on like this in this capacity. Like we talk about all these other cons that we go to, but it's a lot about selling stuff. It's a lot about, like different rooms.
Capitalism.
Well, it's also seminars and things, to be fair. This is pure gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's selling anything here, which is kind of nice.
It stayed alive through passion, hard work, and the little people, and it's nice.
Yeah. Well, the thing I want to talk about now is this is yours and my first time doing this. And there were a lot of cloudy areas for us. We're learning a lot while we're here. We have a guest who also is a first timer.
Yeah. Today we have Dominic Amarelli with us. And Dominic, let's start off by saying, how did you hear about PrinceCon and what made you want to join?
So I originally actually heard about this probably 6 years ago, or I guess 5 years ago. I lived in Princeton for a short period of time, and I heard about PrinceCon. I was into D&D at that time, but lo and behold, that was the COVID years. So it kind of all fell apart. I moved away, kind of fell out of the purview. And then this year, my one friend was like, "Hey, do you remember PrinceCon? It's actually next weekend." I was like, "Oh yeah, let's do that." So we both came. He unfortunately had some unexpected events that pulled him away. But, I got to come. I got to experience it for the first time. It's been really fun. It's not something I've ever done before in any other scenario.
So how long had you been playing D&D before you came and did this?
So I would say I've been playing for a little over a decade now. I played a little bit in high school with a whole mix of like 3.5 and 4th edition. You know how everyone gets started, kind of mixing it up. And then in college, again, me and my friends are like, "Hey, let's do this. Like, let's play." And that's when like 5th edition was really hitting its stride. So that's kind of when we picked up, and I've been playing since.
And how has PrinceCon and the structure of the game here sort of been different for you?
I mean, besides the fact that if I want to do a run, there's always someone around to do it with. I think like the biggest thing for me is seeing all these some like really interconnected stories all revolving around a central theme is like the biggest part to me. I've played with other DMs, but everyone's always doing their own games. Everyone's doing their own things, and seeing everyone come together and like 100+ people generally having the same ideas of what's going on is kind of like crazy to me.
Yeah, I think, I'm sorry, I'm running over you completely. If you don't, sorry, Rich.
You're okay.
I think one of the things that I've been so excited about in the main room of this is that when you come downstairs and you're in this main room, there's 2 screens up on the board that have all the DMs listed on them and their current status, whether they're in a game, whether they're on break, whether they're away. And there are people gathering, looking at the wall of the different runs and the community sort of experience, because everyone comes back and writes stuff, and you can learn a lot about the campaign just by walking into that room. Then when you go off on a run, you have information to take with you.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, on one of the DMs, Gabe, I did a run yesterday where I made a deal with the devil, sold my soul. And on my run report, I wrote, if, Frick is killed, please contact, Rolls Tier, my character. And then hours later, I received a message in the Discord, the communal PrinceCon Discord, saying, hey, just letting you know, your soul has been freed. Frisk is dead. Yeah. So, I put my character out there. I wrote it on our little run report saying, hey, this is, other players, let's keep this moving. And someone finished it. So it's a good little communal story that may not have a large impact on the story as a whole, but to me, that means a lot.
Sure, absolutely. And this is the thing that interests me most. And a lot of the research that I do in both playing the game and outside of the game is around storytelling archetypes and how we develop and generate stories. And yeah, we know D&D is a storytelling, narrative-based game, and you can generate a lot from it. But this situation at PrinceCon is totally unique in that way, in that instead of having a table with 6 players and a DM making a story, you have 20 tables with 6 players and 20 DMs. I'm not sure if that's the exact number, but everything funnels back into that one pot. And that's what's really cool about this.
Yeah, I've been seeing, it's kind of harkens back to what I said earlier about everything being interconnected. Is, I was on some runs that I thought were completely separate from the story at large. And, then I come back and see a run report from, 24 hours later that, hey, no, they actually found this, ancient being's soul or ancient being's heart within the temple. And hey, that actually connects back to the green, which is this year's theme. And, this is just another clue on to maybe there's a way to solve this, or the overarching story and how it impacts all the players and the world that they've created.
There's a table upstairs in the main room that has all these pieces of paper on it. And it looked to me like someone got really angry and tore up the instructions, because I'm looking and here's this table with all this shredded paper being taped back together. I'm like, what happened here? And then I realized that at the end of runs, certain players collected torn pieces of paper that were a manual on how to deal with a certain thing that's present in the theme, the green. And this was like an instruction manual that was left behind by some researchers. It's a physical object in the game. It's an artifact of the game that was fragmented, and people are bringing it down from different runs and piecing it back together. You can pick it up and read it.
I've seen like the same thing. And we found our DM yesterday, we went into a research lab and had something, it might've been honestly that same run where we did bring back paper. We also brought back like berries and other stuff, because the DM was like, put it in the room. Let's see if any of the players eat it. Because if they bring those berries on another run and eat it, the DMs have this list of all the items, all these special things. So we'll see what happens.
Oh my God, it's fantastic. Unbelievable.
I remember that like on our first run at PrinceCon this year, we had players that were kind of talking about some strategies they thought would deal with the green creatures. And we were kind of just blowing them off a little bit. We were like, no, I mean, what, salt? You think salt's going to do something? Nah, that's crazy. No. And then like the next day we came back and read the paper that someone put together, and it said something about them having a weakness to salt. And we were like, oh my God.
Yeah, we felt bad for not taking them seriously. It just seemed too simplistic to be an antidote or something to fight with. Dominic, thank you for talking with us. This is great. So let me ask you a question. Are you coming back?
I am. And I've, as much of my experience playing is actually more as a DM than a player. I've been trying to get a vibe about, hey, what is the experience of moving into the DM role? It's only my first year, so I feel like I might be overstepping a little bit, but I know, they're always hurting for DMs, and it's something I'd want to do. But regardless of what position I'm coming in, I'll definitely coming back.
I didn't realize that. So I'm in the same boat. I'm the forever DM. And this is one of the rare times that I become a player. And I'm already thinking about stepping into the DM role. But let me ask you this, because I have this, I love failure. I love the challenges that failure give to me. And I've actually been talking about this with some other people about how when the vibe doesn't go the way you want it to, how do you shift the mindset? And so I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I'm really good at running a table of 6, but a table of 6 strangers on a constant rotation, this is a new challenge. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the same way. I've been playing with almost the same group of people for the last like 10 years. So moving from a very familiar setting to this is a large endeavor. And part of that is like, it's already driving up a little anxiety in the back of my head saying, oh, what if I'm not there? And at the end of the day, I'm just trying to think, well, everyone is here to have fun. And one of the runs yesterday, there was a point where one of the DMs, they couldn't find their notes or couldn't do something. And it didn't matter. We got up, we're like, they're like, I can't find my battle map that I prepared. It's like, we're in these rooms, we got chalk, let's just draw it on the board. So even the players are here, and I'm not, some people are new, some people are also experienced, but everyone's willing to pitch in and help the DM, because everyone's involved. It's everyone's story.
I love that. Yeah. So that makes me feel better. So appreciate that.
It makes me feel better knowing like, okay, if I mess up a little bit, at least I'm not ruining everyone's time.
Totally. Dominic, thanks so much. I look forward to getting up there this afternoon with you.
Same. All right. Well, have a good day.
Take care, man. All right. So it was really cool to hear Dominic's point of view as a newcomer to the whole thing. And I kind of wanted to ask him a little bit about some of the confusion that I had when I was trying to like dissect the website and understand how this rolled, but I'm sure we'll get to that at another point.
Yeah. And it was really good to hear his perspective as a DM coming to this as well.
Completely. That was totally unexpected. And I really appreciated that as well. We got to take a break. And you guys out there, you're going to hear some words. And when we come back, we're going to talk to a student at Princeton who actually runs this whole show, which is really kind of interesting. So I'm looking forward to that. We'll see you in a few. Hey, esteemed listeners. Listen, if you like what we're up to today and you like the content that we produce here at Wither and Bloom Studios and what we talk about on iCast Guidance, today's request is going to be a little bit different. Sometimes I'm trying to get you to subscribe. Sometimes I'm trying to get you to go over to Patreon and support us. Today, I think I'm going to just ask you to share the word. Tell people that we're out there. Tell people that this podcast exists. Tell people that Wither and Bloom Studios are putting together a good thing. I see comments on our channel all the time that we're underrated, and we really want to grow. We want to talk to more people. We love getting into a bigger community, and I feel like you all can help us do that. So do me a favor this week. Tell a friend we're out there. See if you can get someone to listen. It'd be greatly appreciated. All right, let's get back to the show. All right, so we're back from the break, and I'm excited to have Shannon Filer here, which, you have done some amazing stuff. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I'm very tired.
I bet you are. You're like on point. This is a huge thing. So, number one, you're a Princeton student, and you're graduating this year.
Yes, I am a senior.
And how did you get involved with this? Let's start there.
I became involved because when I entered as a freshman in 2021, during COVID, I had gotten into Dungeons and Dragons after being into live action roleplay for a long time. And I decided to join Dungeons and Dragons on campus. And the group that I had joined had all of the previous presidents of Simulation Games Union in it. And essentially, these guys wanted to pass off the torch to someone who was newer, who was younger, and I happened to be the only person there who was not a senior. So that it just kind of naturally fell to me because they were my friends and they wanted someone to keep this alive.
Nice. Yeah. And I got to tell you, like, I've watched you like running this thing, and I'm looking at some of the like logistical properties of this from the tech end of things, from the food, from the number of people. You're good. Like, I sent you an email and I was like, hey, your Discord link's broken. Can you get me one? And it was like, bam, there it was. So that was like, it was really impressive. I appreciate that. How has it been? Like, in terms of, I'll assume, was it freshman year that you started doing this?
I started becoming the con director last year. So my junior year was my first year as con director. The year before that, I was just an officer in the Dungeons and Dragons Club. And once the SGU president had officially graduated, I took over from there.
Do you miss playing D&D at this thing? Did you ever play at this thing?
Oh, I still play at this thing.
Yeah.
I don't.
She's going out on runs and everything.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought that this like completely consumed all of your time. Like, I can't see how it couldn't.
Oh, it does. That's why I don't GM, because it would consume all my time even more if I did.
Gotcha. And so, all right. So that's good. At least I don't feel bad that you're not able to play. Hugh earlier had mentioned something about project management boot camp. He keeps mentioning this. Is this something that so I think what it is he sees what you're doing and running this show as a kind of student boot camp in an experiential level that you wouldn't normally get as a student as part of a class, right? Those real world experiences, typically we don't get those as students. What do you think of how this is affecting you and your experience to go out into the world?
I think it's an incredibly positive experience. My mom worked in academia and ran conferences, and me and her commiserate all the time in terms of, conferences in academia versus this is PrinceCon, a gaming convention, which is different, but in the end, very, very similar. I'm running a convention solo at the age of my first year I did this, I was 21. So I think that was something that was very, very useful for me.
So that's actually really, exciting. And number one, I love that you can commiserate with your mom because I'm sure you've got a lot to talk about. What's been the most challenging thing, as, the organizer of this?
The most challenging thing has been balancing expectations in terms of the university's expectations for events, as well as the continuing legacy of PrinceCon as this longstanding organization. The university is constantly changing their position on a lot of their events is constantly changing. And also there's the alumni expectations of how the event runs. And so balancing all of that, I think definitely has been a huge challenge, in addition to expanding the con and making it something that is sustainable and as kind of intensive as it is today. So my year was kind of the years where we started introducing having food at the event, which is having catering. Going through every single university kind of step and process has been something that in my term has been very much prioritized in terms of making sure that we are on the very good graces of the university, which we currently are. We have a ton of support from the university. And we really want to make sure that keeps going. And we're this highbrow event, which I think we've definitely succeeded in. That's
fantastic. I have spent a quarter of a century in academia, both full-time and part-time. And so all of the questions I want to ask you about the university's role in this, I know not to, because I don't want to potentially challenge the good graces of the university, because I know that these things are complicated and I understand they don't always go as well as we want. So it's nice to hear that the university supports this in the way that it does, because while I view Dungeons and Dragons directly as what should be an academic pursuit in all the different ways that it can contribute to curricula, I don't know if universities always necessarily see it that way. And so for Princeton to really recognize that, and I imagine part of that is due to the legacy. Is that sort of accurate?
I believe it's due to the legacy of the event, the fact that we're in our 48th, debatably 49th, debatably 50th year. However, another thing that is really important for this event, and the reason why the university prioritizes us, is that it is one of the best events for interaction with the community. It is an overwhelmingly positive event where we bring in people from the public and the community, as well as alumni, as well as students, as well as graduate students, and everyone is coming together in a way that is incredibly positive. And the university really does, that's part of their agenda the last couple of years, and they've really tried to prioritize that. So we have a lot of support from them in terms of making sure we create this inclusive, fun event that is accessible for everyone.
It's fantastic. It's fantastic. Well, I got to say, like I said before, I've been watching you run this thing. I am eternally blown away by that. I also am eternally blown away by how badly I can't wait to come back, because I feel like that's just been, ever since I got here, I'm like, God, I'm going to be at this thing every single year. And I know that's due in large part to how well it's run. So I appreciate all that. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
Of course. Thank you so much.
All right. We'll look forward to seeing you up there for the conclusion.
All right. Thank you.
All right. So number one, I love that we're getting all the angles of this, because, Shannon and running this whole thing was great. And there's so many facets to this whole con, which I love.
Next, we have Dennis Yee, who is actually accredited on was it the lore book?
The con book.
The con book. Dennis, how you doing?
Hi. Yes, I'm listed as the secretary.
Nice.
And so, like, give us a background on your role and what you do here.
I started as just a GM, but I started just doing things like managing the Discord server, scheduling meetings, taking notes, and I've recently started helping maintain the con book itself, which is it is the lore book that we publish every year and give the players to guide how they guide them into the world and how they make their character.
And this, I'm so glad you're talking about this, because this is one of the gems that I fell in love with when I walked in the door. The book that you pick up when you walk in the door that basically gives the overview. There's beautiful art on the cover. It's got a lot of the different complex situations inside. Tell us about that.
Yeah, indeed. It's admittedly a like huge effort, often very messy and very volunteer driven. Every year it's kind of whoever steps up to make certain things happen. I have to, for example, credit that this year the theme had a lot of emphasis on magical personal powers, which we call techniques, magical techniques. And these ended up being spearheaded by another one of our volunteers, Michael. And he led technique review sessions where we'd look at our submissions and we would go over, which ones, how to word things more clearly or how to make things more exciting. That was a purely anarchistic process almost, where he just stood up and said, let me take charge. I want to make sure this is done well. I think that's a lot of it. For example, things like making sure the Discord server functions nicely and making channels when requested, or getting roles done correctly in Discord servers. That's what I do. And I just started doing it because I thought somebody needs to do it.
Yeah, it's a fantastic process. The Discord server is phenomenal.
Yeah.
You can really tell how much the people involved love this thing.
Yeah.
How much work they put in. It seems like this con is as good as people want to make it, and as streamlined as people want to make it.
Yeah. If there's one thing actually, though, I want to say is that I'm particularly proud of is that I love it as also, not just a place to do my part and like contribute to things, but also to express myself creatively. I love every year coming up with this whole scenario, coming up with this whole plot, and weaving together these plot threads, arcs. And for example, I also wrote a whole bunch of, I wrote 3 little microfiction snippets that we published on the website to advertise different parts of the universe in narrative, snappy story form.
It's
and
great.
I'm really proud of doing that. I love doing it. I love when players get excited, and I love lead them into like cool places.
Are you DMing this term?
Oh, of course.
Yeah. And how's that been? Your runs are going okay?
Yeah. Always expect the unexpected. I am also a bit of a marathoner GM. Oh, okay, bit is maybe underselling it. One of the quite there are a few of us who are dedicated marathoners who try to keep it up. On the player side, there's the players who can't get enough, and on the GM side, there's, oh no, I wrote too many events. This plot, they need to meet all these people. They need to figure out stuff. There's not enough hours for them to do this all. And that's kind of my situation.
And are you running have you gotten any sleep?
Oh no, actually.
So that's one of the things about this con is that you can basically run full-time, all-nighters, nonstop. It runs 24 hours a day.
Although, I didn't plan. I planned to have more of a break, for example, but one last game of mine, my players did not, I'll say, achieve their objectives very quickly. Things dragged on. A different ending than I expected to happen occurred. It took a while, but I think that's part of the magic, where unexpected things happen because the players help make it happen. I'm not just doing this because I want to be a dictator. I want to see what happens when the players have their say.
That's the mark of the best DM in my book.
Mm-hmm.
The best. I mean, giving the players the agency and accepting the unexpected is where it's at.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, after all this time you spend world building and creating these awesome, playgrounds for your story, do they ever continue afterwards? Do you do anything with them afterwards?
Oh, I've my game world for last year, I was actually also using for a home game. I'll be honest, I don't do it very much, but we do hear of players, for example, being so excited by things like a comic book that we published. Well, one comic book was published quite a ways ahead of the actual con because the actual con was canceled because of COVID. And I think I remember players having been so jazzed up, so excited, so fired up that they just decided to start running home games in this setting. And then, of course, eventually that convention happened. And it came to life in the full-fledged PrinceCon format.
That's really satisfying. Yeah, that's really satisfying. All right, Dennis, listen, we are going to be saying goodbye. Thank you so much for this. I'm looking forward to getting upstairs with you and concluding this game. I can't wait to see how it goes, but thank you. We really appreciate you hanging out.
Thank you too. I hope that I didn't come across as too loopy. Maybe a little bit.
No, come on. We're all kind of like that. It's cool.
It adds flavor.
That's right. Yeah. All right. We'll see you upstairs. Thanks so much.
I'll be off to my final game.
Woo. All right, so we're covering the gamut here. We've gotten so many people to talk about this whole event, and Dennis's whole secretary aspect of this in the book that came from him is just phenomenal.
So many different perspectives.
One other person that I'm really excited to get their perspective on, because this is the big part of it that I'm in love with, is we've got Aaron Mulder here, who has a huge hand in the development of all the tech that goes into running this thing, and it's really interesting. Aaron, how are you doing?
Good.
So talk to us a little bit about your role here, because it's bigger than just plain old organization.
Yeah. So we use software at the con to track people who check in, the games they go on, the experience they gain over the weekend. Because it's one world and you're using the same character, your character advances over the course of the weekend. And we use the software to track that. We use it to kind of guide players who are newer to D&D or 5th edition. It guides them through the choices they're allowed to make for their character as they create it, as they level up over the course of the weekend. We found early on that there was a big diversity of experience among the players. And so brand new players, very experienced ones, we try to include them all in the event.
Yeah, but the key here is you wrote all that software.
Yeah, well, it's been written and rewritten over the course of many years.
I'm sure. And especially, I can't imagine how much a rule change in D&D throws that off for you to some degree. Maybe not. I don't know.
Well, the D&D rules are a mess for software, because they're so inconsistent. One will say, if you have things that depend on this, you can't change it. And the next will say, if you have things that depend on this and you change it, they all change too.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Well, I will say this, I had a little confusion coming into this for my first time, and I thought, I got to make a character. So I did it the traditional way. Like I got pen and paper out, I got my player's handbook out. Then I went on D&D Beyond. And then I realized none of that mattered, because I had to come here and actually go through the system that you've created. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. I found it to be fantastic. Like it worked really, really well. Like I'm going through logically through a series of steps, generating this character. I was like, this is really good. One of the things I love about what you've implemented in this software is how the DMs have the ability to hand out predetermined magic items to their players that have a barcode on them, and they have some kind of mechanic in the game. And then what happens is those get checked in to the system and physically become part of the inventory, or not the inventories per se, but they can track what attributes those things have. Is that right? Like I'm still a little foggy here.
Yeah, so this came from early in the history of PrinceCon, when people started giving out magic items, and suddenly players, produced these wonderful items that, people were a little skeptical as to whether they had really, earned all these things they were showing up with. So they began to have each GM create an item list that defined all the items they might give out over the course of the weekend. And if a player showed up with an item that wasn't from a GM's item list, you knew it was, fake.
Gotcha.
And over the course of the con, we've started tracking more information about those items, like how many charges do they have? Can they only be used by certain kinds of characters? Do they need to be attuned, in 5th edition? And the barcodes came later, because by the end of the con, people would come to an expedition with a huge number of items. And in order for the desk to start that game, they had to go through and enter them all in, and it took forever. So now we barcode the character sheets and the items so that, when you go to start a game, you can just zip through it with a barcode reader. Bam, 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 bam.
That's fantastic. Now, so let's talk about leveling for a minute, because the characters obviously we started at 5th level when we started this whole PrinceCon. And then this is new, I think, at certain times we level. Is that correct? But that's not always been that way.
Right. More traditionally, there's been an experience track that depends on how long your games were, when in the weekend they were, what kind of scores you got from your GMs on your performance as an individual and as a party. And all that went into an experience point calculation that then, produced a level. But we didn't always find that to be fair. In the middle of the nights, some GMs could be super generous giving out their experience scores, whereas others were tired and conservative. And it wasn't necessarily that one group played that much better than another, yet, it could make the difference in what level a character was going into their last run. Mm-hmm. We could have two people that had games side by side all weekend and ended up different levels because they had gotten different scores. And, I think years ago, people would have argued that's fair. That's the way it should be. Your experience points are a reward for your performance and you should strive to perform better, right? But it seems like these days people are more into the kind of milestone advancement. Like, I want to go with a level 7 party. I don't want to be the level 6 character in that party,
right,
all in this together.
I think there are two reasons for that, right? The first reason being like inclusivity. You want to include families and people with kids and whatnot, and those people can't stay overnight to do the whole marathon thing, right? So they don't want to come in the next day like really under level.
Right.
And also the second thing being an emphasis on storytelling over just like a numbers crunch kind of game, right? And that lends itself to milestone much easier.
Yeah, though there is some diversity across GMs. We've had a GM this weekend say, my next run is going to be the boss battle. And so you don't go to that if you're looking for puzzles and exploration, right? Whereas other GMs will never have a battle. They're all about the puzzles and trying to have a more mental game of it.
And not that I want to propose anything that might leak out into the world and make your world as a software developer more of a headache, because I know this could do that. But I noticed that, so we have all the DMs have a poster on the wall for their particular run, and that poster will collect reports on different runs that have been there before. They have a star chart for how combat heavy or how narrative heavy that actual run might be. Is there a plan to get that side of it built into the digital end of things?
I would say not necessarily, because those posters and things usually come together more last minute, and it would be tough to squeeze them all into the software at that point. But one of the things we did this year for the first time was put up a GM availability chart on the wall through the software. So there's a projector shining onto the wall, which DMs are ready to run, which will be expected back soon.
It's super helpful as well, because like us coming in for the first time, we didn't know like any DMs. And when we asked around and we heard like who's great at role play, we got like a few, and then we see where they are and if they're available. And that was just super helpful. So thank you for including that.
Well, and part of it is because we're different than a traditional gaming convention. We don't have fixed slots. The games tend to go until they're done. But that does mean you can't, just sign up for a 6 p.m. game and, show up at 5:55 and you're good to go.
Right.
There is a little more self-organization involved, but, it also lets you pick your group and DM and target, what kind of runs you're looking for and things.
Which I need to get better at, because I had a plan yesterday. I was sitting there waiting. I knew who I wanted to be with. I knew the time they were supposed to arrive. But as a floating player in the room, someone comes up to you and says, hey, are you looking to go on a run? And I'm like, well, I'm kind of waiting. And then you feel bad for rejecting them. And then you wind up on a run you didn't expect to go on. And it was like, I should have waited. But, it is what it is.
Comparatively, we went to PAX this year, and trying to get in the time slots to play with some of the GMs there was the worst thing I've ever experienced in my life. And it made me never want to try to play a game at PAX or something like Gen Con again.
Yeah, you got 100,000 people there, of course.
Yeah, it's like impossible. Everyone just gets there early in the morning, reserves their spot, and then they may or may not show up. So you just end up waiting outside the door.
That's kind of lousy.
Yeah, it's not. I prefer this more guerrilla style of like organization.
Yeah. I mean, I won't claim it's the be all end all. There have been times when people showed up and couldn't get on a run for a couple of hours because, either their timing was poor or the GMs were available, already had a big enough group or whatever, So that we just try to manage that by enlisting enough GMs that we won't run into that kind of problem, that there's always someone, that available or that we can call on, and we don't leave players stranded. But, some years it's been a challenge, especially, our peak time is Saturday, 4:00 in the afternoon for whatever reason. So, we have to intentionally plan to have all hands on deck, Friday night, Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening.
Fair.
Fantastic.
You guys take every GM or DM that volunteers?
No, we're selective about who we invite because part of the reputation of the event is the quality of the DMs. So
how do you screen that?
By having them play first. And we invite the best players to be DMs if they're so inclined.
Oh, awesome. Interesting. That's really good to know.
Yeah. And I will say this, the DMs here are wonderful. Even the ones who proclaim to be first-time DMs, I have noticed that they are really quite good. So, if you're thinking about coming to this and you're worried about your experience, don't show up. It's, sign up, I should say. Don't just show up. But Aaron, this was awesome. I'm really excited to see how this develops and plays out with the technology end of it, because I love what you're doing.
Great.
So
happy to hear it.
So this was amazing.
Oh my God. So many good insights that we wouldn't have got if we didn't talk to these people.
I know. And I feel like I still left a lot out. I know that, I picked up on this thing because I work with Steve Caruso, who is one of the other long-term, lifelong members, players, DMs, a fantastic DM. But I wanted to kind of get into how people find out about this and on and on and on. But I felt like I left a bit out.
Yeah, it's fine. People can go on the website and, read the nitty gritty details. But I think we provided a lot of, helpful side information that'll be good to know when people decide they want to come by and try it out.
Yeah. And like we always say to you, if you go over to YouTube and look up Wither and Bloom Studios on YouTube, you can find in the description of this podcast, we will put all of the relevant links that you might need to find out more about PrinceCon and how you can be part of this. It takes place usually in March, winter months of the year. And next year will be PrinceCon 49, which we're creeping up on 50. So I have a feeling things are going to get really good.
I have a question for you. After seeing PrinceCon and how they weave, it's another level of collaborative storytelling because they're weaving different parties and different DM styles into one thing. Does this make you want to run multiple parties in your world?
100. It's almost like you're reading my mind from my ride home last night. So I'm thinking about Vesper and the world that I'm creating, and that we have one party in there. And I'm like, okay, but I just, as a DM, I just don't have time to run more games.
Yeah.
But I think that once I produce the material on Vesper as readable material, other DMs could, and then we can collaborate.
Yeah.
Like you, for example.
I would love to run some games in your world.
Let's do it.
Sick.
Let's do that.
And then that can help you expand just world building wise,
Yeah. So I think this is definitely the value there. So for those of you that are listening, number one, thank you for listening. Definitely subscribe to our channel. And if you have questions about PrinceCon or are looking to bring more complexity into the way that you tell stories through these kinds of more complicated, multiple DM situations, write them down. Let's talk about them. We'll come back and talk about this some more. But we're going to be signing off from Princeton University in New Jersey and PrinceCon 48. Rich, this was great.
This is all time. Yeah, man, I'm glad we came.
Let's get upstairs and get on a run.
Hell yeah.
All right, everybody. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Peace.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to iCast Guidance. iCast Guidance is produced by Todd Lambrix, Garret Brennan, and Rich Frohman. We drop this podcast every week, and we are looking forward to having you hang out for more. Don't forget to head on over to Wither and Bloom Studios on YouTube, follow our channel, and definitely comment on what you see there. We will probably read those on this show. Thanks again for listening. We look forward to next time.